Right, we're back live tonight here on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. Transport Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga has welcomed the signing into law of the economic regulation of transport bill by President Cyril Ramaphosa. The legislation is meant to consolidate the economic regulation of transport into a unified framework and policy, which will see the integration of pricing and access to transport facilities. Chikunga joins us now for more on that. Good evening, Minister, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening to you and good evening to your viewers.
So you seek to achieve two things. One, a single transport economic regulator. Two, of course, putting this bill in place, an economic regulation of transport bill. Now, you've identified some challenges. Logistic costs in South Africa being quite high compared to other counterparts if you look in the world. You've looked at fragmentation as part of the issues that you're seeing in the sector. If you look at rail, you look at air, you look at road, you look at the pipeline and what are the acts there that are governing that particular space, causing a lot of problems and inconsistency. And in some areas, there's just regulation that is not existing. Why do you believe that coming up with a new entity is going to be able to solve all those challenges?
No, thank you very much for having us and for the question. The TR establishes two important entities. The first one is the one that you have mentioned, which is the Transport Economic Regulator, whose responsibility is in twofold. One, to ensure access by issuing operating permits, but also to ensure cost, that when tariffs are set, it's tariffs that are acceptable to the users. So this is an important one. And secondly, it establishes the Transport Economic Council, which will serve as an appeal entity in an event a person who has applied maybe for the operating permit is not granted and is not satisfied. They will go to the appeals council. Now, what this does, it ensures that the roadmap that was approved by Cabinet gets implemented. It actually ensures that once and for all, we separate the infrastructure in the case of rail from infrastructure managers, from the operators, so that anyone who would want to operate will not go to Transnet. I'm making an example because it is both the operator and the infrastructure manager, or it is the landlord, but it will go to the TR and apply for the operating permit. Yeah. So you now have a body that will ensure that if I want to operate in the rail sector in South Africa and I have a train of my own, I can then go and apply for the permit to operate on whatever rail line or corridor. That is what is important. And therefore, it makes it possible now within the law framework that we will be able to separate for once the operators from the infrastructure owner, which in this case has always been one and the same entity, and therefore monopolizing. This is one thing that is important about this. It enables us to once and for all implement the roadmap with its implementation plan, but also to ensure that the private sector participation framework is also applicable. And whenever you speak about the private sector, people think about a particular racial group. As a matter of fact, if you look at the objectives of this legislation, it wants to ensure that the SMMEs also play an important role in ensuring that they participate in the sector.
So what does that mean then? You've got the Ports Authority, you've got those who give permits for airlines, you've got those who give permits for taxi operators, truck drivers and so on and so forth. Are you dissolving all these authorities to one?
We will start with the obvious ones. For instance, in the rail sector, we don't have any entity that is responsible for the issuance of permits, because remember, it has always been the Transnet which was owning the infrastructure but also operating. So there's not been any competition between the two. There was therefore no need for any entity that will issue permits, other than, of course, the railway regulator, which will give permits just to the Transnet freight rail. So that was that. But now we're going to establish this one. We'll start with the freight rail and ensuring that the permits to operate in the railway sector are granted and given by the TAR. So that's the first one. The second is the issue of cost. What we will again do, even from the regulator that are existing, we are just going to remove the economic regulating aspect of the work, that is the costing part of the work. You will know, for instance, that SANRAL, when it comes to the decision to either increase or not to increase the tolls, it does it itself. So that function will then be moved from SANRAL to the TAR. You will know that in the aviation sector, for instance, we've got the regulating committee that decides after consultation. It's a long process, and it is also in the Act itself. Then, of course, that regulating committee function, it now will move to the TAR, so that we know we're going to therefore, you just going to do away with the regulating committee. The port regulator will be the one that is going to establish this important TAR, because at least it is an entity that exists. When, for instance, you're talking about the regulating committee, it is a committee, it's not an entity, it does not have the staff, it gets supported by the Department of Transport as its secretariat. So you don't have anyone who is employed to do the work for the regulating committee, it's just a part-time job. So it's easy to do away with that and take the function to the TAR. But for the ports regulator, then you have people that are employed. It's an entity with the CEO, with the executive, with the staff, with the board for that matter. Right. And that is why then the ports regulator would be the anchor of the establishment of the TAR. So it's definitely going to change the name from it being the ports regulator, because it will no longer be only responsible for the tariffs that are set for our ports, but it will be responsible for other tariffs as well in other entities and other modes of transport.
So in that complexity, I mean, one looks at it and says, well, if you're dealing with Eskom, at least you know you're dealing with electricity. It's one commodity. You're able to standardize the method of setting tariffs. How do you do that in that level of complexity where you are dealing with road, air, as well as rail freight as well?
Definitely, we're going to have people in the boards that have competency in all these areas. So that will be important. Remember, even with the ports regulator, it has got a board that was deciding on this. You have got your regulating committee in the aviation. You have got, I want to believe that we now are going to have some people that have the competencies when it comes to road as well. So you're going to ensure in terms of the Act that you have all these skills, you have all these people that are able to deal with these issues. For instance, it might be as well be that at the particular time you are dealing with the aviation tariffs, and therefore you need those competences, and those are the people that will come in and ensure that, of course, those get decided upon in terms of how much our entity is supposed to charge for tariffs, particularly those that are operating at our airports. That will be the same thing with the ports per se. That will be the same thing with roads. That will be the same thing. But that will be happening within one entity with different skills, with different expertise that are required for different modes. But that also is going to assist in that it will ensure some integration in as far as these things are concerned as they are being done. For instance, remember I said one other function for the TAR is the ensuring access. And it's important that we are able now to say we have got trains that are moving towards this direction. What about the road transport, for instance? What about the trucks? Where can they load and offload so that there's that integration? So if you have got one entity that is responsible for that, the integration is actually going to happen easily. And that is why it's been for quite a long time that we've been talking about the single transport economic regulator. And we have reached that stage now where we can have one single economic regulator.
Yeah. So there's a question around the funds then for this body that you're going to establish, and whether the administrative independence of that body is guaranteed. So there will be no minister that is breathing down the neck of this regulator.
We've got quite a number of regulators in the transport sector even now. It's not the first time that we're going to have one. For instance, we have got the regulating committee in the aviation sector. It decides on tariffs for AXA and ATNS. And you don't even know as to when the processes start because you have got nothing to do with that. If you are to come in, maybe it will be because maybe somebody is not happy, particularly in the aviation sector, because for now there is no appeal system. Then it's then that they will come to the minister. But otherwise, in other sectors, the ports regulator, for instance, they decide on tariffs, they issue them, you never come into the picture, so there's no influence. You appoint the board, you appoint the CEO, but after that, they then run their business. You don't have to interfere. You can't even interfere because the processes are their processes. So there's just no need for any interference at all.
The regulations themselves, are they now in place? Because the bill is almost seeking to establish those two entities, the Transport Economic Regulator and the Transport Economic Council. But are the regulations now clearer as to what actually is going to be running these entities?
We actually ran a parallel process as we were busy processing the act or the bill and therefore leading to the signing by the president. We're also busy with the regulations. Of course, the president signed this bill into act last week, and therefore the regulations will have to come to the Minister of Transport for signing, because when it comes to regulations, you consult, of course, but it is the Minister of Transport that will sign off those regulations. So yes, we do have draft regulations ready to be presented to the Minister of Transport. And for the Minister of Transport, if she's happy with that or he's happy with that, then we will sign them off into now regulations and not draft regulations.
And those outline functions, I suppose, that will be excluded if there are any.
The regulations by themselves will answer quite a number of questions. The how, the what, the when, by who, and so on, what, and so on. Whether you speak about even forms for that matter. So the regulations are more detailed than the act itself. The act will say you shall appoint the CEO from who's got these qualifications and so on and so forth. But then the regulations will go into details about that, giving the processes, if there are forms to be filled, explaining the forms and so on. So that will be the difference. But like I'm saying, the regulations will now have to be presented. The final regulations will have to be presented to the Minister of Transport for the minister to sign them, because parallel to the process of the legislation itself, we're also busy as the department with the regulations. So we do have, yes, draft regulations.
So the other question, of course, that has raised concern about this single framework and one-stop shop, one entity, so to speak, is that it might have job implications for the other entities. Do you have a response to that? Are jobs going to be impacted by this, and the migration process might see other functions becoming redundant?
Like I'm saying, the entity that will be affected here is the ports regulator, and even the legislation itself, it says the staff of the ports regulator will form the TER. So no one is going to lose his or her job from the ports regulator. Nobody. For as long as you are employed there, you're going to form what now will be called TER. That's where we'll start. But if you look at the work itself, it has expanded. It therefore means that you might need more staff even for the ports regulator, because remember, the ports regulator was only responsible for the ports tariffs. Now it's no longer the ports tariffs, it's the aviation, it's the rail, it's this and that and so on. So you need more people coming to work, and therefore no one is going to lose any job. As a matter of fact, we might need more people being employed. From the entities, for instance, like I've said, the regulating committee, I'm just making an example. In the rail sector, you can't even talk about it because we didn't have a TER-like entity either than the rails, RSR, which is a rail safety regulator, but it's not going to affect it because it is taking just a small portion of the work that they do. They're still responsible for the safety in terms of rail, in security in terms of rail, and therefore it's not going to impact in any way in the staff establishment of the RSR. But if you talk about, for instance, in the aviation sector, I've said to you that the tariffs are set by the regulating committee, and it is a part-time committee that gets called only to decide on these matters. So there isn't any staff complement that you can talk about. The Department of Transport is the secretariat of that regulating committee. All that you are going to do, therefore, is take that portion of work from the regulating committee to TER, and therefore nobody is going to lose any job out of that, because in any event, you did not have anyone being employed by a regulating committee in the aviation sector. If you talk about, for instance, SANRA, all that you are going to do is to take the portion of SANRA that decides, for instance, on tolling, to say now it is going to the TER. And these things are not going to happen overnight, and that can definitely not impact in anyone at SANRA, because you would not have one person who waits for deciding on the tolls and the funding for tolls. So that one, or tariffs for tolls. So that one will definitely not impact on anyone who is employed. It would have had impact on the ports regulator, but a decision was taken consciously that the TER will absorb the staff of the ports regulator. That's the only entity that will get dissolved and absorbed into the TER, that is the ports regulator of South Africa.
And the final area of concern, will the introduction of this bill affect, for example, all the other programs that have got to do with subsidies? For example, you hear the taxi industry up in arms saying, well, this will probably affect the tax recapitalization program. The buses also want their subsidies, and other players now coming in saying, is this going to have any impact on subsidies at all?
In fact, there should not be any concerns with this. In fact, we should be celebrating as South Africa, because it's bringing something that we have not had for quite some time. We've been complaining about the rail-friendly cargo being on the road. This bill ensures that we once and for all move the rail-friendly cargo from road to rail. There cannot be any issue about the subsidies, because this has got nothing to do with subsidies at all. It's got nothing to do with fares as well. The taxi industry and whoever else will still take decisions on fares. We have actually published the public transport subsidy policy for a consultation with the taxi industry. It has got nothing to do with this, absolutely nothing to do with this. This is something completely separate, and therefore it's not going to affect that. It's got nothing to do with the tax recapitalization project. It's got nothing at all with that. That project will continue until such time that the government decides on whether we still have taxes that require scrapping. And that is all. That's a project that is separate from this. It is for public transport. It's got nothing to do with the TR.
Minister, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on this evening. That's the Minister of Transport, Sindisiwe Chikunga.